Tom, thanks very much for joining us. We've just been speaking there off camera and we're talking about the excitement up on Tyneside over Callum Wilson and Ryan Fraser. Just how big of a loss will they be to Bournemouth, and just what are Newcastle getting? If you look at it, they seem to be getting two quality Premier League players.
Yeah, I think everyone will be looking back to sort of 2018-19 rather than last season. I mean, last season didn't go well for the club or for them sort of personally, really. They didn't really hit the heights of the previous season. But like you say, that the season they had the year before, especially together, to get them both at the same time together at a new club, I think it's going to be quite exciting. I think they've shown that they can produce for each other and they can do it at the Premier League level. Say in terms of, is it a big loss? I mean, obviously Fraser's been gone a little while. They started the season again without him. He didn't sort of sign his new deal, so they've been sort of got to terms with that one a little bit. And in terms of Wilson, I think as soon as they went down, it's inevitable he's going to go. Really, I think he's got his eyes on the Euros next summer, which is understandable given sort of his age. It's the ideal time for him to get back in the England squad, and he's going to have to be in the Premier League to do that. So it's two big players for him in recent years, but it's not come as a sort of a huge surprise. I think they've sort of been planning for it in the last sort of few weeks, ready to lose both of them.
Now, Newcastle's need for a striker was blatantly obvious, but we'll concentrate on Ryan Fraser first of all.
Yep.
Newcastle have got quite a few midfielders, quite a few creative midfielders. Goals is what they seem to be lacking. And you mentioned there that last season wasn't the best for either player. I mean, Fraser only got one goal, 16 goals in his time in the Premier League. I think it's 16 in 120. Is that something he needs to improve on, do you think? Is his goal ratio, or is he more that creative player who will be provided in the assists?
Yeah, I think he is sort of more of a creator, really. I mean, he took quite a lot of set pieces at Bournemouth. I mean, I'm not sort of sure what the pecking order is at Newcastle, but I mean, he provided a few assists from that. And I think, if I remember rightly, his goal last season was sort of a free kick, which ended up going all the way in. I think it was a bit of a fluke, to be honest. But in terms of the season before that, he got quite a few. They got a lot of assists and scored goals as well. And that, I think that sort of showed everyone that he can add goals to his game. Obviously, like you say, he's played a lot of games, but a lot of those were as a substitute in the first few years, I think. So it sort of skews it a little bit. But I think given his age now, and he is mainly a creator, but I think he's shown, like I say, he's shown a couple of years ago that he can score. And if he's in the sort of form he was in then, he's going to get in around the goal, and he's got goals in him for sure. But yeah, last season, for a host of reasons, didn't go as he would have liked it to. And like I say, only one goal was disappointing from his point of view and for the team. But the season before, he's shown that he can do it. So I think that there is certainly goals in him if they can get him in sort of the right sort of areas of the pitch, really.
Now, a lot of people are impressed with his interview on the club website. But a few people just saying, well, he didn't want to play after the football restarted during lockdown. And you mentioned the season prior to last season when he played really well. Do you think his head was turned? Is there a bit of a issue there over attitude, or is it more he had ambitions and he maybe let his ambition, thoughts of a top six side get ahead of him and he got distracted? What happened there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, I mean, he's the sort of character he is. It's one you wouldn't have expected to happen to him. I mean, I remember speaking to him at the end of that 2018-19 season after he'd done so well, and obviously he had the contract situation there. And I know sort of players say all the time that they'll sort of focus on where they are and all that sort of thing. But from speaking to him regularly, you can see he's the type of character that really he just wants to play football. He wouldn't really bother where it was. I mean, he sort of said, like, it was pretty clear at that point he probably wasn't going to sign another deal, but the club didn't want to let him go. They were happy to let him go for free if that's what it took. And from the way he was speaking, he was sort of okay with that. He was happy where he was. He was happy to play out another season. He wasn't going to sort of kick up a fuss about it. If he got a move last season, then great. But as soon as the club said they weren't sort of going to let him go, he was happy to do that. I mean, in terms of what happened after that, I'm not sort of entirely sure who was sort of advising him and things like that. And obviously, I think naturally, when you are getting linked, he was linked with all the top clubs last season. I think it is going to turn him a little bit his head. And he came out in an interview around sort of Christmas time. I mean, he's refreshingly honest from sort of a journalist point of view when you speak to him. It sort of gets him a little bit of bother, I think, from the club. But he came out and sort of said that it did affect him, that he wasn't sort of doing everything he could for the team, and that his head was turned a little bit to the future. And I mean, you don't sort of tend to hear players admit that, but as soon as he did, he sort of knuckled down after that between sort of January and March. And then, yeah, I mean, the way it sort of ended for him not coming back and playing the rest of the season, I think that's naturally left it on a bit of a sour note with the fans, because they hope to come back and try and keep him up and then go after that. I think they would have sort of lived with that a little bit. But so I think the whole situation, it's not something that he's really used to. It's the first time he's been in that situation in his career. He's generally much more focused on what's happening on the pitch, and as soon as all these other factors came in, I think it did get on top of him a little bit, and I think that hampered him for the first half of last season.
Were you surprised that it's Newcastle he's ended up at? You know, given that he was linked to Arsenal, linked to Spurs, is it a surprise that he's headed to Tyneside?
I mean, not massively. I mean, given sort of his, if he was to go last summer, then maybe. Because obviously, like I say, he was linked with all the big clubs, but last season he only scored 1 goal and I think 4 assists, and for most of last season wasn't looking like a top sort of 6 player really. But I know moving back up north is quite a big thing for him as well. Obviously, with a family, it's still obviously quite away from him to visit his family in Scotland, but it's a lot closer than it was down here. So I think that would have played a big part. Sorry. So yeah, I think that's certainly something. Obviously, it sounds like the fact he knew Callum was coming as well, and I think Newcastle's still a massive club. I mean, obviously they're not in Europe or anything like that, but it's still a big historic club, and I think that would have certainly been of interest to him. And given the geographical position of it as well, I think all those things combined make it just a great place for him to sort of make a fresh start, really.
Now, players like John Joe Shelvey, Alan St. Maximin, they've all spoken about how Steve Bruce kind of makes them believe in themselves. He gives them confidence. What kind of player is Ryan Fraser? Does Ryan Fraser need an arm around the shoulder? Does he need that ego boost sometimes? Is he similar to the likes of Shelvey and St. Maximin in terms of, you know, the manager kind of saying, you know, you are this great player, you have this talent, and making them feel like, you know, they're on top of the world?
I think so. I mean, him and Eddie Howe had a really close relationship. So when he sort of first came in for Aberdeen, he was a little kid really back in 2013, and he wasn't really in the side very much, and obviously a long way from home, and it was a struggle for him at the start, and he wasn't really playing. Went out on loan to Ipswich, and I think worked really well under Mick McCarthy. I think it was Mick McCarthy at the time, and then came back and was sort of on the bench and started becoming an impact sub, and then forced away into the team. And I mean, when he got settled in the team, sort of him and Eddie never said a bad word about him, even sort of during the contract talks and things like that. And when it was pretty clear he was going to go, those two were really close. And I think even now they'll still probably stay in touch when all this sort of blows over. That relationship was quite key, I think, in getting that out of him, that belief that he could push on to the levels that he has done. And yeah, I think, like I say, Steve Bruce, looking from the outside, seems a similar sort of character in terms of the man management and things like that. And I think that's someone that Fraser can work pretty well with. So yeah, I think that's obviously not sort of privy to what those discussions were, but I imagine the conversation with Bruce to Fraser probably played a pretty key part in his decision as well.
You mentioned Callum Wilson, obviously he's the other Bournemouth, ex-Bournemouth player who's joined Newcastle. How crucial do you think he would have been to Ryan Fraser agreeing the deal? Obviously, the deal with Ryan Fraser had been days, if not weeks in the making, but there was a bit of delay. Callum Wilson ended up actually being unveiled before him. Do you think seeing that ambition that they were signing, not just, you know, a Premier League proven striker, but someone that Fraser knows really well, someone he's got a good relationship with, do you think that played a part in Fraser agreeing, or, you know, finally agreeing to sign for Newcastle United?
Yeah, I mean, sort of the character of Fraser. I mean, he had a lot of sort of close friends within the squad. I mean, a close group of friends, and some of them have been leaving over the last few years, and I think he was left sort of the core group of them are pretty much gone. So I think having someone like Callum up there with him just to get him started, I think somebody would have been a big boost. I mean, I think they lived on the same sort of street. I think he just told me a couple of years ago when they got all those sort of assists and goals together. So they're pretty close on and off the pitch. So I'm pretty sure that would have played quite a big part. And like you say, he scored. He knows he can score goals, and he knows he's going to help the team. Those two. So I think the fact he's got someone coming up there with him, he may well have signed anyway. That's like I say, there's lots of factors for him signing, but I'm sure that could have only helped his decision again.
Callum Wilson, then another person who was linked to some, you know, top teams, and in the end is obviously signed for Newcastle. 8 goals last season, but you know, he said in the interview with the club website that, I'm quoting here, not something I'd like to associate myself with. So I'll be looking to get double figures as soon as possible. You know, having the 2 injuries that he's had, you know, it's good to see him back and fully fit. A gamble for Newcastle, or is he over them injuries? I mean, obviously he's had the medical, so you know, he must be, but you know, you still get the questions about. I remember when Demba Ba signed for Newcastle and he had a knee injury, and everyone was, or West Ham wouldn't touch him because of the knee injury or something like that. Anyway, and you know, he ended up being brilliant for Newcastle. So, how did he bounce back from them 2 injuries, Callum Wilson?
Yeah, I think that he's sort of well over them now. That was a good couple of years ago. He's gone and played for England since that, so he's sort of, I think, well through that. And like you say, the first one, I think he said before, was a blow, and to get the second one again, just when he was getting going in the Premier League again, was a massive setback. But the fact he's come back from them now, I guess he's sort of he's got more minutes to give in the legs if you want. If he's obviously signed a long-term deal at Newcastle, and you'd imagine he's got plenty of football in him if he can stay injury-free, which I think, if I remember last season, I think he only missed 2 or 3 games from memory, some of them from suspension actually. But yeah, so I don't think injuries are really a big problem in terms of that now. So I don't think he's going to be worrying about that. He's played pretty much all the games for Bournemouth the last couple of seasons, really, since he's come back. So yeah, like you say, some clubs look at it and will perhaps be a bit put off by it, but Newcastle splashed the money out for him, and he was on Bournemouth's best player last season, so they clearly weren't worried about it either. So I don't think that's going to hold him back really now.
Good to see that he has that ambition, that desire to get into double figures for next season. Obviously, he's got that hunger and that desire to get into the England squad. And I guess the fact that the Euros have been postponed until next summer, maybe it suits both Newcastle and Callum Wilson in a way, because Newcastle have not only got a Premier League proven striker, but they've got someone who's got that added motivation as well, because he wants to, be part of that squad, heading into the Euro Championships next summer.
Yeah, obviously he's not in the squad currently, so the chances are he may well have missed out if it was this summer. That's just the way it's worked out. So his form, like you say, he scored 8 goals, I think, from what he said in the interview there, and just from seeing him this season, it wasn't his sort of standards really. I think he ended up with 8 goals, which was more than anyone else in the team, which says a lot. But for the majority of the season, he wasn't up to the standard that he has been in previous years. So there's a lot of reasons for that. The team obviously wasn't functioning for large parts as well. They ended up going down, so it's not all on him, but there were a lot of. He sort of scored. I remember this towards the start of the season, I think he said he wanted to try and get I think it was 2 goals every month and just keep the goals ticking, and then you end up with a good tally in the end. And he ended up getting 3 or 4 quite early, and then went sort of 10 games without scoring and sort of score again. So he was quite sort of patchy last season, which you'd go a long run of games without even sort of getting a chance or shots, which was a big worry. And yeah, I mean, when they towards the end of the season, he started to look a little bit brighter again. But say last season was sort of one to write off for him. I think he's obviously been signed for more for his season before that, really, and I think he's at a good age where he can definitely get back to those sort of levels now.
Yeah, he's in them kind of peak ages, isn't he?
Mm.
I mean, obviously, he'll come to Newcastle. He'll be well aware of the history of that number 9 shirt if he does indeed get it, and the strikers that have gone before him, the pressure that that number 1 striker has on Tyneside. And we had Joe Linton last season who struggled, one Premier League goal. I think John Joe Shelby was the top scorer with something like 6 from midfield. So how will Callum Wilson handle that pressure? Because he is moving to a club with expectation. They want everyone to try the hardest, and if you do that, you'll get respect. But that number 9 shirt, or even just the main striker, will carry such high expectation and weight. So how will he handle that, do you think?
Yeah, like I say, I think obviously at Bournemouth in the last few years, he had all the credit in the bank of getting them promoted and battling back from the injuries, but he's pretty much starting fresh now. The Newcastle fans aren't going to be too concerned about how he's done in the past. He's got to come and hit the ground running. But I think last season, when they were in trouble for a lot of the season, all the players always said, Callum's the guy who's going to get us out of this. So he had that responsibility pretty much all the time. I mean, it sounds like he might be playing sort of a bit of a different system at Newcastle from what he's been used to, but I think he's a sort of character as well. He knows if he wants to get in the England squad, he's going to have to score goals for starters. So he's got that inner pressure from himself anyway. He wants to put right, I think, what happened last season, where, like I say, he said himself, it wasn't what he wanted to do last season. So I think he's got his own internal pressures, and yeah, obviously there's added pressure when all the fans are back in St James's Park. It's going to be sort of quite unforgiving if he sort of doesn't start in the target. But I'm pretty sure he's going to be okay with handling the pressure side of it. It's just if he can get off to a good start, and then he, like I say, one of the strikers who can go on a run of goals, and if he can get them early, then I think he'll be perfectly fine.
And what sort of character is he? Because being up in Newcastle, obviously, I don't know what it's like in Bournemouth, but Newcastle's a bit unique in certain circumstances, because it's, if you're walking around the city and you're out, you're going to get dozens of people, respectively, but coming for an autograph, for a photograph. It is life up here, dictates how people feel on a Monday when we do get back to the office, if we ever get back to the office. Is that different to how it is in Bournemouth? Do you think the pressure will be slightly, like, life up here is going to be slightly different because obviously the city and what have you, and it means so much to fans? I'm not saying it doesn't to Bournemouth fans, but is it going to be slightly different, do you think, and how will he handle that?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously hard to say for definite without obviously having lived up there at all, but I mean, I get what you mean. I think down here that he'd lived pretty much a quiet private life where away from the pitch, where he's very family orientated. He's got his kid, and I think he tries to keep himself to himself. But at the same time, if he sees fans, I know he had a good relationship with fans for the majority of his time at the club, and I think from where he's come from, obviously his early years in the Midlands, where he's come from up there, he knows the sort of humble beginnings, if you like, and I think he'd be more than happy. It might be a slight change straight away from how it's been for him here. Obviously, everyone knows him now more than they did when he was sort of around Coventry, maybe. But yeah, I think as long as he's scoring, I'm sure the fans are going to be pretty happy with him. So I'm sure he'll be perfectly fine with speaking to them. I mean, it's basically what happens on the pitch. They're going to dictate that, isn't it? But yeah, I'd say the character he is, he knows where he's sort of come from, where he wants to try and get to. So I don't see that being a big problem for him, really. I think it'd be okay.
And what are his best attributes on the pitch? What stands out for you when you watch him play?
So when he's in sort of top form, I mean, it's his pace and ability to sort of run in behind and just be a real nuisance for centre backs. Really, I mean, he loves to sort of shove defenders about. Probably sometimes when he shouldn't do, but I mean, he gets involved with that sort of thing. And when he is in top form, he's a great finisher if you get him chances. As long as there's people up and around him. I mean, at Bournemouth, they tend to play sort of 4-4-2 with a striker just playing behind him and helping him out, sort of the running and that side of things. So then he would when he got the ball around the box, he'd tend to score. But I mean, last season, like I say, it's somewhat different to the previous season, sort of how it went. But before that, he always looked. So I think the pace and the movement that he had around the box, and that's showed by, I think he scored 14 goals a couple of seasons ago. So that's not a bad return at all, really. Except for a sort of mid-table team. So yeah, I think his finishing and his pace and movement up front when he's in top form and just being a real nuisance to the defenders really is what he'll hope to try and get back to this season.
A few people on Twitter, mostly kind of opposition fans or very, very disgruntled Newcastle fans. Thankfully, they're in the kind of minority with these two signings. But they point out that along with Jamal Lewis, who's set a sign from Norwich, you've got three players who've been relegated and will coming from championship sides who will be playing the championship next season. Does that matter? I mean, I've put the argument out that it really doesn't matter. You've seen Nathan Ake head to Manchester City. They're Premier League quality players, aren't they, Wilson and Fraser?
Yeah, I was going to say, obviously, you've seen Ake's gone to Man City, Sheffield United have signed Ramsdale. I mean, they're all sort of picking off these Bournemouth players, which sort of makes you wonder why they did go down, and all these players are as good as all these clubs want them, and they did so well the previous seasons to stay up relatively comfortably, really. I mean, last season was massively underachieved, I think, as a squad. There was various reasons why, but I think at the start of last season, Eddie Howe said it's the best squad he's ever had. So, I mean, those players don't become bad players overnight, really. Like I say, Wilson, Fraser, Ake have all proved themselves for years in the Premier League. One bad season, I don't think it clearly hasn't put teams off signing. Obviously, Fraser was free, which makes him perhaps a bit more attractive. But Callum Wilson was playing for England last season. I mean, it's not like he's suddenly fallen off a cliff in terms of that. He's been scoring in the Premier League for 4 or 5 years now. So yeah, I don't think that's you can see why fans would say, obviously, if they start and don't perform well, they'll say they're poor last season, they're still poor now. But I don't think that's the reason Bournemouth went down wasn't solely because of one or two players. It was a sort of big collective thing. And yeah, I mean, like I say, they've shown they are, like say, Premier League quality players, and it's just about them now getting back to the form they had maybe a couple of seasons ago rather than one season.
Penultimate question then. West Ham on Saturday for Newcastle. Callum Wilson, will he be fit and ready to go? Has he had a decent enough pre-season with Bournemouth?
I mean, he hasn't played. They had 2 friendlies. The first one, they went out to Benfica and played, and he missed it with a slight Achilles injury, is what they said. And then the second one, they played West Ham actually at the weekend, and he wasn't involved, I think, presumably because this transfer was all going through. So he hasn't played games, but he has been training as with the rest of the group for the majority of the 3 or 4 weeks they've had now. So he always tends to score against West Ham, so I think he's pretty keen to get out there and do it again. So I'm pretty sure sounds like he's going to be okay to play in terms of sort of match fitness and things. He hasn't really had much. I mean, Fraser's a little bit different. He hasn't played since March at all. So I imagine he's going to take a little bit of time to get up to speed, you would have thought. But in terms of Wilson, I think the injury, it sounds like he might have had was just a minor one, and he's been training as the rest of them have. And I think he played obviously all the games as well before just like a month ago, really. So it's not like they've had a massive break. So I'm sure he'll be fine to go, and looking forward to going off against West Ham.
And just finally then, can you see why Newcastle United fans, or the majority of Newcastle United fans, are excited about these two signings? I mean, you've watched them play for Bournemouth over the years. Do you share Newcastle fans' optimism that, you know, these are two really good additions to that squad?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, obviously a lot of the Bournemouth fans are looking at particularly Fraser in particular, and they've departed on poor terms. I mean, there's no sort of getting around that, which is a real shame. So he was a real fan's favourite before last season. Obviously, the fact he didn't sort of help them try and stay up in the last few weeks obviously hasn't gone down too well, as you can imagine. But in terms of their performances and the way those two linked up, I think 12 goals they combined for a couple of seasons ago, which is what I got, I think, a record for a 38-game season. So they're clearly, they know they've got a good relationship. They're coming straight in. Obviously, they'll sort of get used to the system, things like that. But they've proven they can play together. They've proven they can do it at the Premier League for a good few seasons. So yeah, like I say, Newcastle fans, they have a reason to be excited about what they could potentially deliver if they can get back to the form they had a couple of years ago. So yes, both of those players, I think, need the new challenge, and they've been at Bournemouth for a long time. So I'm sure they're well keen to get going. And yeah, I'm very interested to see how they get on this season now.